Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into some epic ancient history, so get ready for a journey back in time. We're talking about the Illyrians, legendary warriors, fierce pirates, and master shipbuilders who dominated the Adriatic and Ionian seas. So, who were the Illyrians? These folks lived in the region known as Illyria, which stretched across the western Balkans and even into parts of southern Italy. Their history goes way back, we're talking 2000 BC kind of back. They weren't just fighting off their neighbors like the Greeks and Romans, they were often duking it out among themselves. It seems like every tribe had a bone to pick with the other over land, resources like iron and salt, or just plain old grudges. Now, the Illyrians weren't just brawlers, they were also pretty crafty. They were known for their skills in building warships and crafting weapons like the sica, a curved sword that was so effective, even the Romans eventually adopted it. These guys controlled much of the sea routes and were feared across the Mediterranean for their pirate activities. They were basically the pirates of the ancient world, long before the Caribbean ever got its rep. Speaking of legends, the Illyrians even show up in Greek mythology. There's this story about Cadmus, the same guy who's credited with bringing the alphabet to the Greeks, leading a tribe called the Incili to victory in battle, all thanks to some divine advice. If that's true, that battle would have gone down around 2000 BC, but it wasn't all about fighting outsiders. The Illyrians were often at each other's throats. Different tribes would team up with the Romans or Greeks when it suited them, but more often than not, they were busy fighting among themselves over territory and resources. One infamous incident involved the Romans stepping in to mediate a conflict between the Dalmatians and Liburnians over a place called Cremona. The Romans played referee, but you can bet they had their own interests at heart, slowly extending their influence in the region. The Illyrians had some notable kingdoms, too. The Incel tribe was the first to form a kingdom around the 8th century BC, but they eventually crumbled, giving way to other tribes like the Taulanti and the Autariati. The Ardii, under King Agron, became one of the most powerful Illyrian kingdoms before the Romans eventually took them down. Their society was pretty interesting as well. Most of these kingdoms were small, and their exact borders are a bit of a mystery, but we know that their internal organization was heavily influenced by their Greek neighbors. The warriors were typically peasants fighting under aristocratic leaders, who each controlled their own little fiefdoms. It was a monarchy, passed down through families, and marriages were often used to forge alliances. The Liburnians, one of the Illyrian tribes, were particularly famous for their seafaring skills. These guys were all over the Adriatic and even set up colonies in southern Italy. They ruled the seas with their swift ships, called Liburnas, and were a force to be reckoned with until about the 6th century BC when other powers started muscling in on their territory. And now let's explore the fierce battles and power struggles of the Illyrians. But guess what? The story doesn't stop there. We're moving over to southern Italy now to dive into the intense Iapygian-Tarentine wars, conflicts that show just how messy things could get when cultures clashed. So, let's set the scene. It's 706 BC, and the Greek colony of Taras, which we know today as Taranto, has just been founded. Right from the start, they ran into trouble with the local Iapygian tribes, the Messapians, Pustai, and Taunians, who weren't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. These tribes wanted to keep control over the fertile plains of southern Italy, and they weren't going to let the Greeks expand easily. Fast forward to 473 BC, and the tensions really explode. Taranto teams up with Region, now modern-day Reggio Calabria, to take on the Messapians and their allies, but things don't go as planned. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, what followed was one of the bloodiest battles the Greeks had ever seen, with thousands of Tarentines and Regions losing their lives. That loss shook Taranto to its core, and just a few years later, in 466 BC, they were defeated again. This time, so many of their aristocrats were killed that it actually triggered a political shift, leading to the rise of a democracy in Taranto and the expulsion of the Pythagoreans, a group of philosophers who were pretty influential back then. But the Iapygian-Tarentine conflict didn't end there. Around 440 BC, the Messapian city-state of Brindisi allied with Thurii, bringing in an exiled Spartan general named Cleandridas to lead their forces. This was during the Peloponnesian War, where Taranto sided with Sparta against Athens. The Athenians, meanwhile, backed the Messapians to counterbalance Taranto's influence. By the end of the 4th century BC, things took a surprising turn. The Messapians and Tarentines, who had been at each other's throats for centuries, found themselves with a common enemy, Rome. They put aside their differences, at least for a while, and joined forces with Cleonymus of Sparta to resist Roman expansion. But as we all know, Rome wasn't a force to be easily stopped. Now, shifting our focus back to the Balkans, we've got Bardyllis, an Illyrian king who really shook things up in the 4th century BC. Bardyllis didn't just want to rule his own tribe, he aimed to unite the Illyrians and expand his power. And he did just that, bringing several tribes together and turning Illyria into a significant player in the region. In 393 BC, Bardyllis and his forces delivered a crushing blow to Macedonia, forcing King Amyntas III to flee. For a while, the Illyrians had the upper hand, even making the Macedonians pay tribute. Bardyllis didn't stop there, he also led raids into Epirus, teaming up with Dionysius of Syracuse to put a puppet ruler on the throne. But when the Spartans got wind of this, they weren't having it. They stepped in, defeated the Illyrians, and put an end to their control over Epirus, but not before the Illyrians caused serious damage. Bardyllis wasn't done yet. In 360 BC, he launched another invasion, this time against the Molossian kingdom in Epirus. Although initially successful, the Molossians managed to turn the tables using some clever tactics, eventually driving the Illyrians out. But the real showdown came in 359 BC, when Bardyllis took on the Macedonian king Perdiccas III and won, killing the king and thousands of his soldiers. It seemed like nothing could stop Bardyllis, until Philip of Macedon came into the picture. Philip knew he needed time to build up his forces, so he made a peace treaty with Bardyllis and even married an Illyrian princess, Bordata. But once Philip was ready, he launched a full-scale assault, defeating Bardyllis in a brutal battle in the Archaeology Valley, where the Illyrian king was killed. And just when you thought things couldn't get any more chaotic, enter the Celts. In the 4th century BC, Celtic tribes started pushing into the Balkans and Italy, bringing a whole new wave of conflict. They first clashed with the Illyrian tribe, the Archaeology, and later launched devastating attacks on other Illyrian tribes. These Celtic invasions, combined with internal conflicts and the rising power of Rome, eventually weakened the Illyrians' hold on the region. And after all those intense battles with Macedon, Illyria wasn't done yet. The Romans were starting to pay more attention to the Adriatic, especially after the First Punic War. They were concerned about the trade routes across the sea, and their attention eventually turned to the Illyrians, who were united under Queen Tuta at the time. Now, Tuta was known for her boldness. She even had a Roman envoy killed, which was a pretty big deal. This led to the First Illyrian War from 229 BC to 228 BC. Rome sent in a couple of consuls, Lucius Postumius Albinus and Gnaeus Fulvius Centumalus, to handle the situation. They didn't mess around. The Romans took control of key Greek cities like Epidamnus, Apollonia, and Corcyra, and they set up a protectorate over these towns. To keep things in check, they installed Demetrius of Pharos as a counterweight to Tuta's power. But that wasn't the end of it. The Second Illyrian War broke out in 220 BC, just as Rome was also dealing with conflicts in Cisalpine Gaul and gearing up for the Second Punic War with Carthage. Demetrius, now a major player, decided to build a new fleet and went on the offensive, starting by attacking Pylos and capturing a bunch of ships. But his ambition got the better of him. With his forces spread thin, the Romans saw an opening. They captured the city of Damali and then went after Pharos, routing Demetrius' forces. Demetrius fled to Macedon, where he became a key advisor to Philip V of Macedon until his death in 214 BC. Then came the Third Illyrian War in 168 BC. This time, King Gentius of Illyria allied with Macedon, but it didn't go well for him. Initially, Gentius had been on Rome's side, but in 169 BC, he switched alliances, joining Perseus of Macedon. That turned out to be a bad move. The Romans, led by L. Anicius Gallus, defeated Gentius at Skydra in 168 BC. Gentius was captured, brought to Rome, and displayed in Gallus' triumph before being imprisoned. Through these three wars, Rome gradually crushed Illyrian power, suppressing the piracy that had made the Adriatic a dangerous place for Roman trade. It was during the first of these wars, in 229 BC, that the Roman navy crossed the Adriatic for the first time, marking a significant expansion of Roman influence. Now, if you think that was the end of Illyrian resistance, think again. The Great Illyrian Revolt, also known as the Pannonian Revolt, kicked off in AD 6. This was a massive uprising that lasted for 4 years, driven by the Dziciates, a group from what is now Bosnia and Herzegovina, led by Bato the Dziciate. They were supposed to join the Roman campaign against the Germans but instead turned their weapons on Rome itself. Soon, they were joined by the Bruci, another Illyrian tribe, and things got serious. The Roman forces suffered heavy casualties, and for a while, it looked like Illyricum, a crucial Roman province, was at risk of falling. Rome went into panic mode. Augustus, the emperor at the time, ordered his stepson Tiberius to drop everything and handle the revolt. Tiberius moved his main army to Illyricum, while Marcus Valerius Messala Messallinus took charge of Dalmatia and Pannonia. The situation was so dire that Augustus had to raise a second army, even resorting to the compulsory purchase and emancipation of slaves to fill the ranks, a move that hadn't been seen since the aftermath of the Battle of Cannae. The revolt was intense, with brutal guerrilla warfare in the Bosnian mountains and fierce battles in southern Pannonia. It took 3 years of hard fighting, but by AD 9, Tiberius finally managed to put down the revolt. Just in time, too, because that same year, in Germany, Arminius was leading a rebellion that wiped out 3 Roman legions. The effects of the Illyrian revolt didn't just end with the fighting. The Roman soldiers, who had been through hell during the campaign, were not happy with their pay or the rewards they were given. This dissatisfaction led to a mutiny in AD 14, where they demanded better compensation. Tiberius had to send his son, Drusus, to calm things down. As for the Illyrians themselves, they were known as fierce warriors. Their armies were often made up of peasant infantry led by local aristocrats, and they were particularly skilled at partisan tactics, which allowed them to inflict serious defeats on even the best Roman legions. Their naval strategies, though different from the land tactics, were also impressive. They employed smaller, faster ships that used guerrilla-style attacks to dominate the Adriatic Sea for centuries. So, even though the Romans eventually brought Illyria under control, the Illyrians didn't make it easy for them. They fought hard, using clever tactics on both land and sea, and their resistance left a lasting impact on the Roman military. And now let's delve deeper into their military culture and the significant role it played in their society. The Illyrians were fierce warriors, and their affinity for weaponry was evident in how they treated their tools of war with reverence. Many Illyrian warriors were buried with their weapons, a practice that has allowed us to uncover a wealth of historical artifacts. These finds offer a glimpse into the martial life of the Illyrians, though ancient sources often provide only fragmented insights. One notable mention comes from the Roman poet Ennius, who, despite his origins in the Messapian region, offers a rare perspective on Illyrian arms. Weaponry was integral to Illyrian life, particularly during times of conflict. However, the privilege of owning high-quality armor and weapons was often reserved for the wealthy and noble classes. Items like greaves and helmets were luxuries, often beyond the reach of the common warrior. This distinction underscores the societal divide in Illyrian culture, where the elite could afford superior protection, setting them apart on the battlefield. The Illyrians were known for their use of shields, dating back to the Bronze Age. By the Iron Age, 2 primary types of shields had emerged: the circular shield, favored by most Illyrians, and the oval or rectangular shields used primarily in the north. The circular shield, typically crafted from wood and leather and reinforced with a bronze boss, was light and practical for quick, agile combat. The Illyrian shields, while similar to the Macedonian versions, had distinct features that set them apart, particularly in their decoration and construction. When it came to body armor, the divide between the rich and the rest of the society was stark. Bronze breastplates and greaves were rare and typically found only in the graves of nobility. Northern Illyrians were less likely to use such armor, and when they did, it was often rudimentary. One unique piece of armor from this region was the bronze pectoral, a small, disc-like breastplate that offered minimal protection, but was likely a status symbol as much as a defensive tool. Helmets, too, were a marker of status among the Illyrians. The bronze conical helmet was common, evolving into various forms, including the Shmarjet helmet, crafted by the Gepodes in the Lica Valley. This helmet, made from wicker and chain mail, was a distinctive piece, sometimes enhanced with metal plates. Influences from neighboring Italic tribes introduced the Nagao helmet, which became popular from the 5th to 4th centuries BC. The most iconic, however, was the Illyrian helmet, often adorned with a crested plume, its use and origin a topic of debate among historians. The Illyrians were also skilled in the use of various swords, with the sica being their most famous weapon. This short, curved sword, developed during the Bronze Age, became a symbol of Illyrian martial prowess. Its blade, typically around 16 to 18 inches long, was effective for close combat and was adopted by other cultures, including the Thracians, Dacians, and even the Romans. The sica's reputation as a weapon of stealth and assassination further added to the Illyrians' fearsome image. In addition to swords, the Illyrians used a range of other weapons, including javelins, long metallic spears known as sibana, short thrusting spears, battle axes, and bows and arrows. These weapons highlight the versatility of the Illyrian warriors, who could adapt to different combat scenarios with ease. The Illyrians were not just warriors but also mercenaries, often hired by other powers like the Greeks and Romans. However, their reliability as mercenaries was questionable, as they were known to switch allegiances if it suited their interests. This trait led to incidents like Lysimachus's infamous massacre of his 5,000 Illyrian mercenaries, convinced they would betray him. Illyrian nobility distinguished themselves from the common soldiers by their more elaborate armor. Kings and high-ranking warriors often wore full body protection, a rarity in Illyrian society. These elite figures also adorned themselves with bronze torques and other ornate accessories, further emphasizing their elevated status. The Illyrians were also renowned seafarers, particularly the Liburnians, who built some of the most formidable ships of the ancient world. Their naval tactics were innovative, often involving the lashing of galleys together to create a formidable barrier against enemy attacks. The Illyrian navy, under leaders like King Agron, became a significant force, influencing shipbuilding practices across the Mediterranean. Illyrian ships, especially the Lembus and Liburna, were adopted by many other cultures, including the Greeks and Romans. These vessels were light, fast, and highly maneuverable, making them ideal for piracy, a practice that the Illyrians were infamously known for. The Romans, recognizing the value of these ships, integrated them into their own navy, further spreading Illyrian influence. The Illyrians' reputation as pirates was both a source of fear and their eventual downfall. Their rugged coastline, dotted with islands, provided the perfect haven for launching surprise attacks on unwary ships. This piracy, however, eventually led to their conflicts with powerful neighbors like Rome, who sought to curb their seafaring raids. Illyrian fortifications, known as hill forts or castellieri, were another testament to their strategic mindset. These fortified structures, often located on elevated terrain, served as refuges and strongholds during times of conflict. The construction of these forts varied, with some being simple blockhouses while others were complex, multi-walled enclosures. Finally, the influence of external cultures, particularly the Greeks and Romans, played a significant role in shaping Illyrian military practices. The proximity to Greek colonies and the eventual Roman conquest brought new ideas and technologies to the Illyrians, who integrated these influences into their own traditions. By the time of the Roman conquest, Illyrian weaponry and tactics had evolved significantly, reflecting a blend of native ingenuity and foreign influence. Despite their eventual subjugation, the legacy of the Illyrians as fierce warriors and skilled seafarers left an indelible mark on the history of the ancient world.